Hey everybody, David here, and today I want to explain what the difference is between sequels, prequels, reboots, remakes, and soft reboots. Because a lot of people are sometimes confused, I've noticed. There are people in podcasts and, discussions, like people are always emailing movie pundits on their opinions on what the difference is between a remake and a reboot. And look, I think I've been paying attention to Hollywood enough since I was a young teenager that I've been growing with knowledge in how Hollywood and the movie industry works. Although sometimes it even seems like Hollywood is a little bit confused at what their terminology is at times. So I thought I'd make a video here to kind of get people on board with what the terminology between these specific words are in terms of Hollywood. So let's start off with the easiest, the basics when it comes to movies. Sequels and prequels. Okay, so what is a sequel? A sequel usually is a continuation of the story that has already been established in the first film. So, for an example, the Star Wars trilogy or the Star Wars films are a perfect example of both of these terminologies. The original Star Wars film was 1977, sometimes titled Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. The sequel to that would be The Empire Strikes Back, Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. And then Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, would be the second sequel to that particular film series. But then you also got the prequels, right? So prequels are used for films that take place before the original film. So before Episode 4, for an example, right? Sometimes you could have a pre-sequel. I'll get to that after this. Where, for an example, okay, Episode 1 is a prequel. Episode 2 is a sequel to Episode 1, but it's still a prequel to the original trilogy. And then Episode 3, same thing. So that's your prequel trilogy, because all three of them take place before the original Star Wars films, right? Then you got your, like I kind of hinted at, your pre-sequel, where it's kind of a prequel, but it's kind of a sequel. What's the best example that I can give for that? 300 Rise of an Empire. I think it was the 300 sequel, where it kind of takes place a little bit before, but then during, and then after. Look, not a lot of movies do that, so don't worry about it. I look at the 300 Rise of an Empire as a sequel, because a lot of it does take place during and after the events of the original film. So that's the way you can look at that. And then we get into remakes. Let's get into remakes. Remakes are usually referred to for movies that are like literally a remake of the original film. So they might be hitting familiar beats that the original film hit. The best examples for this are obviously the Disney live-action remakes, right? Like The Lion King this year, or Aladdin, or Dumbo, or Cinderella. Those are movies that actually take what was already established and are just hitting those marks again, more or less. They might tweak some stuff here and there, to allow itself to stand out a little bit from the original film, but for the most part, they're changing it up. For the most part, they're hitting familiar beats, what the original film did, but they're trying to be better, but usually they rarely come up to be better than the original. So, with that being said, what about reimaginings, right? Reimaginings is another way. Usually, it's more or less the same, but sometimes they're changing it up even more so to the fact that it's almost not an entire remake, if that makes sense. Alice in Wonderland you can look at as a reimagining. I guess Alice in Wonderland is a good example. I guess even in some ways Dumbo was a reimagining too, right? It was changing up a lot. Like it was really the first 40 minutes of that movie which was more true to the animated film, but then it changed up enough towards the end which allowed itself to stand out. I usually classify those ones as remakes, but reimaginings is an okay terminology to use on that too. Reboots, though, is something completely different. Reboots are usually referred to movies like Batman Begins as a movie that goes back to the drawing board, but instead of following familiar beats that the original movie did, it's completely ignoring it and starting from scratch. So they want nothing to do with the older films and just doing their own thing. Like the story is completely different, the tone is completely different. They're not trying to capture anything that the original film has done. A Casino Royale is another example of what a reboot is. It ignores everything that the first 20 James Bond movies did, and Casino Royale starts fresh and new. So if you have never seen any of the Bond movies that came before that, they're letting you know, don't worry about it. You can check them out if you want, but they have nothing to do with the story and the character that we're playing with here. Remakes are kind of like that too, but they're trying, I guess, to replace, but you can never replace a movie that already exists. It's always going to be out there for people to check out. It's just, it's remaking that story, while reboots is completely ignoring the stories that came before, but starting fresh. So that's the terminology for reboots. And then you got a soft reboot. This is a little bit more modern, I guess. There's two ways of doing a soft reboot. The first way, I think, started with Superman Returns, believe it or not. Superman Returns was a soft reboot where it acknowledged that certain films happened, but it ignored other films. So Superman 1 and 2 are connected to Superman Returns. And it's the same thing like the new Terminator movie that's also coming out this year. Terminator Dark Fate follows the first two Terminator movies with Linda Hamilton, the ones that James Cameron directed, but it's ignoring everything after Terminator 2. So Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines, Salvation, and Genesis, it's ignoring all of that. So Terminator Dark Fate is a soft reboot because it's ignoring certain elements, but it's keeping other elements that they feel is worthy of remembering. So, but there's another way you can look at a soft reboot. A soft reboot can be looked at as, this is a more modern way of doing it, I think, is something like the new Star Trek movie with the ones that J.J. Abrams directed with Chris Pine and Zachary Quinto. Those movies are also can be looked at as a soft reboot, where they're acknowledging in the movie itself, they acknowledge that everything that came before happened, but we're going back in time and changing stuff that going forward we can now ignore that continuity and do our own thing. But at the same time, we're reminding you that everything that came before, so you can still watch those movies in that order, and still watch us right after, because we just went back in time and screwed things up and doing our own thing moving forward. So if we want Kirk to die one day, even though he dies in Star Trek Generations, maybe he can die a little bit earlier in our version or something like that. I'm just throwing out an example. Another perfect example to this is the X-Men franchise. I did a how to watch the X-Men films in chronological order. You can check out that. That's like one of my highest viewed videos. In that, they do something similar, right? You have the old X-Men franchise where it started in 2000, and as you go on, X-Men Days of Future Past comes, and it acknowledges that everything that came before this movie happened, but now we're screwing up time, and now they're no longer going to matter with this timeline moving forward. You have to think of it like if you guys saw Avengers Endgame. I think Endgame explains it perfectly. It's kind of like an alternate timeline where the old timeline still exists, but the new timeline is changing things up. So, and creates a new, pathway, I guess you can say. So, I think that was pretty easy to explain, and hopefully you guys kept up with what I'm saying. If not, I apologize. I explained it the best way I could. And look, this maybe will create a discussion about the terminology of how we talk about movies, because Warner Brothers, they're doing a Suicide Squad reboot, they say, and a Wonder Woman 1984 is going to be a reboot, despite them keeping Gal Gadot and the Suicide Squad keeping some of the cast members from the previous Suicide Squad movie. So how is it a reboot if you're still keeping those cast members? To me, it sounds like it's going to be a soft reboot. They're just not using the term soft. They want to use the complete term reboot, even though it clearly isn't. Or who knows, maybe it will be a complete reboot. Like, yeah, we're just keeping the cast, but we're completely forgetting what happened before. So it's going to be an origin story again? I don't know. Anyways, comment below. I hope you guys liked this video, and I hope it was useful for you guys. Please like it, share it if anybody needs this terminology explained to them, because I do see that happen from time to time, that people are confused about all these terms. Yeah, like this video. Please subscribe to my channel, especially if you are a huge fan of films like I am. And until next time, take care.